Them belly full, but we hungry. A hungry mob is a hungry mob. A rain a fall, but the dirty tough. A yatta yuck, but you'd not enough. You're gonna dance to jam music, dance.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this Art in the Libraries virtual program. I'm Sally Brown, Exhibits Coordinator for WVU Libraries and Lead Curator of Food Justice in Appalachia, our exhibit that we have up right now. I'm coming to you live from room 1020, where the Food Justice Artist Perspective exhibit is, as well as Peyton Brown, one of the artists. She's also here. I am honored to turn this over to some of the artists from the Food Justice in Appalachia exhibit here today to discuss their work, along with WVU Food Policy Director Joshua Loans, who is also the scholarly consultant on the exhibit, who will moderate questions. Welcome, everyone. And first, I'll introduce Eileen Basis, or is it Basis? Eileen, I apologize. Eileen is a visual artist and a poet living and working in New York City. Her practice includes book arts, printmaking, collage, installation, and mixed media on paper. She received grants from the Queen's Council on the Arts, the Puffin Foundation, Dodge Foundation, and the New Jersey State Arts Council. Her solo exhibits include York College, Chashama 266, and LaGuardia Community College in New York City, Brown University, Rutgers University, and Ohio University in Athens. Her group exhibits include Queens Museum, New York City, Jersey City Museum, and Proteus Gowanus Gallery in Brooklyn, and Wiener Library in London. Welcome, Eileen.
Hi there. So I'll talk a little bit about the series that this etching that's on exhibit is from. And this was part of a larger body of work I did that was about issues around immigration and emigration. Okay, and I see the screen is up. This was the first one I did. It was Time to Leave When Soldiers Came. And I asked my, at the time, 5-year-old grandson, why do you think people said it was time to leave when soldiers came? And he said, well, when soldiers come, they kill everybody. So I thought, okay, my young grandson gets it, which was gratifying. I was thinking about, at what point do people decide I can't live here anymore and I have to risk everything, leave what's familiar and go somewhere else. And I expanded that from that one piece into doing more that were used. Everything started with, it was time to leave. And I have When Bombs Fell, and when when people didn't have food. I was thinking at the time, not specifically about Appalachia. I was thinking about the people in Venezuela at that time. There was a big crisis there, and people were desperate, and there were stories in the news about people climbing over mountains to get to somewhere else because there was no food. And I thought, so it made me all think about, at what point do you pick up and leave a country? And that relates to, at what point do you pick up and leave the familiar place you grew up in Appalachia, when there were no opportunities. One of the etchings had, it was time to leave when there were no jobs. So that's certainly also relevant to the theme. And I tend to work with work on the wall, but also I do a lot of work in book arts. And let's see, I can't show what I want to show. Can we? Okay, so, okay. Am I large? No. Let's see. If I'm speaking, do you see me large, Sally?
Yes, yeah, if
Okay.
everyone clicks
All right,
on it.
because I'm seeing gallery and you're big. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
So I expanded this into an artist's book where I took some of the type of imagery I was doing, which is this is a type of lithograph for the art students that might be watching this. And then I did inkjet prints, and everything says, do you leave, do you stay? And you leave, do you stay? When you are hungry, do you stay? Stay or leave? When houses burn, when bombs fall? And then I keep repeating leave and stay. And then, let's see. So these are all inkjet prints. I have an archival inkjet printer in my studio. When nowhere is safe, do you leave? And when you have lost everything is the last one. So I'm thinking about all those big questions about how people are living and trying to survive. And some other, I'm just looking at the chat, it's distracting me. Other themes I've investigated, in addition to themes around immigration and is economic inequality, which also relates to this exhibition. And I did a whole series using Horatio Alger novels, which for those of you that aren't familiar, it's that pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of literature that's survived and kind of permeated thinking, because it's this idea that everybody's so individualistic and self-sufficient and you should be able to make your own destiny, which is true for the few that can do that. But for the vast majority of people, it's a lot more a more complicated picture. And I think that's the kind of thing that interests me, are complicated pictures of things. Nothing's very simple. And I don't know how much time I have left. I feel like I've been talking for a while, but I'm currently working on a series I started at the beginning of 21, which is a series about the Capitol riots and the Capitol rioters. And I'm combining fragmented images of people that have been charged with bits and pieces of the text about what they did. And I think it's really important to keep this in the public eye and to keep thinking about what really happened, especially because there's a lot of denial about what really happened. So that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I really appreciate that. And you're sharing your book there. And Beth has posted some links in the chat to see more of your work. And next we have Peyton Brown, who's here with me in the gallery. Peyton is a 2021 graduate of WVU with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in art education and painting with a minor in art history. She's currently a graduate student at WVU pursuing her Master of Fine Arts degree in painting, as well as a graduate certificate in therapeutic arts. She has developed a realistic style in her artwork, and this series depicts work that discusses food and our relationship with it. Her work revolves around various types of foods, along with specific issues, emotions, and feelings that coincide with these subjects. Welcome, Peyton.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I have a little presentation, a PowerPoint put together that's just going to go along with my talk. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you let me know if you see it? Okay, awesome. All right, so these paintings, these 8 are part of this series. That was actually my senior project in painting about 2 years ago. And so my goal originally was to improve my skills in realistic painting in general. So I chose to do a series of these small food paintings, and all of them were foods that I personally bought and ate. So I would photograph them, sketch them, and then paint them. So when I heard about this exhibit, I immediately thought of my food paintings. As someone who's lived in Appalachia her whole life, this obviously resonated with me, not only because of it being in Appalachia, but also because it was related to art, and I like to, combine them when I can. So I started thinking about this almost as a cycle. Growing up, I'm from a really small town in West Virginia. I've lived in West Virginia my whole life. And I know that not only in West Virginia, but all through Appalachia, poverty is a huge issue. So I was kind of thinking of food justice in terms of not only like hunger, but other issues as well. So the way I thought of it was that this poverty often gives people this only option of buying cheaper or often less healthy foods, which then leads to oftentimes health issues and things like that. So I just wanted to give a little bit of like data here. So here you can see all the blue lines are Appalachian rural people, and then the dark gray blackish lines are non-Appalachian, and it's just showing the percent of people in poverty. So you can see how high this rate of poverty is in Appalachia and through all these different age groups. So then I also wanted to talk about how this coincides with the price of fruits and vegetables and these like healthier foods just skyrocketing. So obviously people who don't have as much like economic opportunities aren't able to buy those healthier foods. And then here I'm talking a little bit about how there seem to be all these advantages to these less healthy foods. They're cheaper, they're easier to cook. And then with that idea of poverty, people in Appalachia are working so hard, long hours, long days. And when you come home, you don't want to make some long, laborious meal. You want something easy. So there are also a lot of disadvantages too. So obviously not good for you, high in carbs, fat, sodium, but at the same time, they're cheaper, they're more accessible, they're easier. So here's just another slide with some more information. 2 million Americans live 20 miles or more from a supermarket. And that really resonated with me because I know a lot of towns in Appalachia are very rural. They're very far away from things. But then also, if you see over here, for every supermarket, there are at least 5 fast food restaurants. So that also kind of contributes to the problem a little bit. And then down here on the left, this 40% increase of fresh produce in recent decades. So there's all these factors kind of against people, especially people in poverty, who don't have that same access to these healthier, more expensive options. It makes things really hard. So then we have the effects of healthy food versus unhealthy food. So if you see under like healthy food, on the left, it would be healthy body and a happier life because amino acids and vitamin B that are found in fruits and vegetables are known to trigger serotonin, which makes you happier. And then also we have the effects of unhealthy food. And then you can see almost 26 million Americans suffer from diabetes, but that's not, it's not just the physical health that's the issue always. It's a lot of times that contributes negatively to mental health. So it talks about how consuming trans fats and things like that also increase rates of depression, which is also an issue in Appalachia. And then one of the last things that I wanted to mention is while there are several pros and cons between unhealthy and healthier foods, I think there's one thing that we can all agree on is that food is something that brings us together, whether it is a get together with family for a holiday or an event or a meeting with an old friend, whatever it is. We usually tend to find ourselves bonding over food. So I actually found this really interesting graphic talking about the top 30 locations for first date. And if you read them, I think all of them or almost all of them are either restaurants or and just like coffee shops and places like that serve food. So I think that really is a testament to how much we bond and share our lives together over food. So that brings me to my paintings. So I just wanted to show all 8 of them just in individually so that you can see the details. All of these are 12 by 12 inches on square canvases, and I used oil paint on them. So what I would do is I would either cook the food or buy it. And a lot of them are those junk foods that are easier to buy, partly because of the meaning of this work and partly because I'm in college and have a budget. So I would get the food somehow and prepare it and photograph it. And then look at that photo as a reference, sketch it out, and then just build up different layers of oil paint until I reached that realistic style that I was trying to achieve. So I think we're getting towards the end here. Yeah, and then here you can see all of them together. I can do it. It can either go vertically or horizontally. So I just wanted to show you guys how both of those formats could work. But that is all that I have. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Peyton. That's great. And I love how we had you situated in front of your paintings too. I'm glad that me and my intern installed them correctly. Now, Leo Morrissey, I'm introducing Mr. Morrissey. He received his MFA from Rutgers University. He has been a recipient of a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant and the Halberg Fellowship from Pilchuck Glass School. His artwork has been included in exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Taiwan Museum of Art, Monash Gallery in Australia, Glasmuseet Ebeltoft, Denmark, and the Musée du Pays at Val du Charme, Switzerland, Eugenio de Almeida Foundation, Evora, Portugal, Galleria Carbone, Ferrara, Italy. His work is also included in Pierogi Flat Files in New York, and Found. A book of Morrissey's work was published by Red Fox Press in Achill Island, Ireland, in 2016. His work is included in numerous public and private collections and archives, including the following: Taiwan Museum of Art, ROC Taiwan, Republic of China, Museum of Modern Art, Silverman Fluxus Collection, New York, Museum of Modern Art, Franklin Furnace Artist Book Collection, and the Jane Voorhees Zimmerly Museum in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Welcome, Leo.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Wow, that was quite an introduction. I didn't expect that. I think it sounds a little better than maybe it is, but thank you. My work is much more about, in an artist statement, I would say my work is about the personal notation of time and place in my everyday life. As I've gotten older, that's become more and more significant, with my work being dated and themes carrying over. So the work in this exhibition is a culmination of things I've done over the years that continue to do. I've used that profile of myself that was a reduction of self-portraits done in graduate school years ago. And it's a representation of, obviously, my profile, but it doesn't mean it's per se a self-portrait. It's available. And as how my work ties into this sense of, the food justice in this exhibition, I don't make work per se for a particular theme or particular thing. I basically react to things in the world around me. I don't consider myself an activist artist per se, but I've been included in many exhibitions such as this and things going back into the 80s with the art against apartheid exhibitions in New York City and some food issues shows there. But my work, because it's related to things from my life and things I experienced. This idea of people being hungry. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world and, some wonderful places, whether you're in Paris or whether you're in Port-au-Prince, you see hungry people. I mean, the extremes of how many and who is much greater or much less, but it's there. And my personal history, growing up in a row home in Philadelphia, blue collar neighborhood, people, Irish background. My mother's family actually left their farm in Ireland during the potato famine. I used a lot of these images, and the images I've been using, like potatoes and carrots, these root vegetables, are subsistence for people all over the world forever. If it wasn't for root vegetables and tubers, many people wouldn't survive anywhere in the world. It's it's the basis of their diets completely. And for these works, I've actually used this. I go back to ideas I've used before. And this idea of, yes, we have no bananas is basically from one of those songs. I think it came out maybe in the 40s. I at one moment I didn't know the author, but it was one of those novelty songs that made a lot of press. And I remembered it from a kid and as a kid, and it always seemed to indicate to me this kind of like where we are in the world, how we, you know, these novelty songs come up, they address issues, you take things out of context, can mean things. And so I use that in these works. I also, in these works, for the hats on these things, they're really, it was basically by making a comment on what's going on in our world today with the working class. I guess, you know, I mean, everybody's watching the, probably seeing Olympics and stuff now, and the current world would probably call these type of wool hats because of the snowboard phase beanies. I think they use the word now, but back in the day and in the working class, they used to be, you know, watchman's caps, or people on waterfronts wore them. And that's these little wool hats. And the nature of who is hungry today has changed a lot. We used to think that just poor people were hungry. And now you have many working class people, people with 2-3 jobs, raising families who are hungry. As was mentioned, the statistics on poverty, I mean, who is in poverty is changing in the nature of our country. And all those ideas were coming to me in these groups of work. When I saw this call for the work for this show, I just thought about those ideas and connections. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia. My studio right now is in Jersey City. You know, I teach in New Jersey at a small liberal arts college. I've spent a lot of years going in and out of New York. But I did go to undergraduate school for 2 years in Marietta College in Southern Ohio. And we used to visit West Virginia. I made a lot of friends, as an athlete, visiting your homes. So did travel that area. And like I said, I've been fortunate to travel all over the world and see these conditions everywhere. And it's universal. It's not just Appalachia, it's everywhere. But I thought Appalachia was a very good example of how the working class had become the victims of food shortages. I think Peyton explained it very well with the nature of the food that travels. You go everywhere in the world and you can find Lay's potato chips, but you may not find a banana. So that's how I came to, offer these works to this exhibition. And I think I'll end it there and wait for the questions. I kind of work better in that format, but thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Leo. And I'd like to introduce Joshua Loans to moderate the questions. He was, like I said, the scholarly consultant for this exhibition, and he's the WVU Food Policy Director. So welcome, Joshua, and feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll get to those after a few minutes.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Leo and Peyton and Aileen, for being here. It's very exciting to meet you. Sally and I and others have engaged with your art over the past year, and it's just been a real pleasure to hear your broader perspectives on it. Unfortunately, a few of our other artists had to send their regrets for today, which does mean that we have additional time for Q&A and questions, and I encourage those on the call to, as Sally said, put their questions in the chat. I was struck by how much hunger and scarcity was a part of all of your presentations, and how that thread really throughout the food justice movement is really the foundational narrative of how activists began talking about food, around access to fresh food, around the structural barriers to access. And the question of leaving too, I think, is really, really interesting in the context of the latest census statistics that we got, where West Virginia is the only state to have lost population, dire economic circumstances here, and a lot of work by community activists to try and enhance access to food under these conditions. So to that end, I'm not going to ask the first question I had planned around what attracted you to this exhibit, because I feel like you all have already answered it. And I'm going to move specifically to a question around the relationship between art and activism, and how you perceive your art in relation to social movements, future social movements, past ones perhaps, and how you hope that this exhibit might contribute to food justice activism here in Appalachia and beyond. I'll start with Aileen. Oh, we cannot hear you. You're muted.
Okay. Art and social activism has been very central to my practice as an artist. And at first, it came upon me in an unexpected way. Back in the 1980s, mid-1980s, I'm an older artist, I started doing a series about the AIDS epidemic. I had many gay friends, and it was an absolutely terrifying time to witness what was happening. And I lost people that I loved dearly. So I started doing some artwork about that. I had a dark room. I was doing traditional photography. And I did a series which were close-ups of bodies in combination with painting on glass or acrylic over it of cells, from medical books, being T cells and cellular imagery. And I thought of it as human issues. This is terrifying to human beings. It's kind of like the pandemic all of a sudden burst upon us, a similar kind of feeling. And people immediately said, oh, you're doing political artwork. And I hadn't thought of it in those terms, that making art about a terrible plague that had descended upon all these people around me was political. And then, but then I realized, well, I guess when you make art about issues that are uncomfortable for people to think about, that becomes a political label. And I embraced that and have gone on to make work about all kinds of political issues, in addition to some personal work. But most of my work is political and tries to speak to the issues around me in a way that make people think a little bit. I don't know if you change anybody's mind by showing artwork about that, oh, people are hungry, but at least you're putting it out there and trying to at least create some awareness. I don't know if art can change the world, but it may kind of create at least a little window for people to stop and think about something.
Thank you for that. Peyton, do you want to respond to how you understand the relationship between art and activism?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me personally, I had never really considered myself a political artist or anything like that. My art was usually just very focused around formal elements, like trying to achieve that sense of realism. And that's what I've been working towards in my own personal work. But then when I found out about this exhibit and I started doing more research, I realized that it's possible to combine the two. Because I've always just never really, I guess now that I'm in grad school, I'm getting into that more, but I've never really thought about my work in terms of really, really deep conceptual meaning. I've always been more of like a formal type of person, it's just like based on the visual elements. But now I think, especially with this exhibit and hearing all of you talk and then through my research, I think it's going to be really interesting moving forward, finding ways to combine the two. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll ask a follow-up from Dean Diaz here, who in the chat said, how has this participation in the exhibit made you think differently around your role as an artist moving forward? So like, what are you getting in grad school and having been a part of this?
It's definitely been a big adjustment, not only with this exhibit, but in grad school, as a whole. In my undergrad, a lot of the emphasis is on technique and developing your skills. And now in grad school, it's assumed that you should like be able to do that. And now it's about the content, the meaning, like what messages you're trying to convey to your audience. So I think that moving forward, that's something that I'm going to make sure is like just as important in my work as, you know, what it looks like visually. So yeah, I think that this exhibit was just a really great way to help spread awareness about an issue, but also get me to start thinking in terms of visual qualities and content and ideas. So that's definitely something I'm going to keep with me moving forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Leo, I'll pass it off to you to answer that question between art and activism.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think I mentioned this in my first opening. I mean, I've never really considered myself an activist artist. I've always been skeptical of the political, you know, the whole nature of that word, and to have myself associated with that is just not something I've ever sought. But in my practice, being about the personal notation of time and place and whatnot, a big thing that goes about that is being aware of the world around you. And, you know, you can either block the world around you out, or you can see what's around you. And because of where I grew up and things I've done in my life, you become aware of certain things. And I think that without a doubt influences the work I've made over the years. You know, when I was younger and right out of grad school, I worked for years as a construction worker in New York City to support myself as an artist. And the city was a little bit rougher back then than it is now. And I grew up in Philadelphia as well. And, you know, when you start to walk certain paths to work every day and ride certain trains every day, you see the same homeless people in the same spot every day for years, and you get to know them, and you talk with, you maybe not everybody, but I would talk with them, and, you know, certain things you become aware of, and this influences what I've done. So in essence, I've made work like the work I've made for this show. And as Aileen mentioned earlier, you know, I've you know, been part of, you know, having work involved in visual aids work and things like that forever. Lost a lot of friends like she did back in the 80s and that kind of thing. So my work has been included in these things. My work is influenced by these things, but it's not being political or being an activist is not per se the impetus that makes me create. What makes me create is what I do. And some of that work then becomes part of this realm of pieces in this body of work that can specifically reflect on or be indicators of, you know, different injustices in the world. And like I said, I've seen these, you know, these injustices are, you know, rather universal. You know, in our country, there's a lot of our social issues and things we have that break down along political lines, or are looked at as, you know, whether it's, you know, how people look and how these issues occur. But these issues occur in all kinds of countries, even where the populations are much more not as diverse as ours. And, you know, things like hunger and hate and blah, blah, blah. The list is, you know, racism. And the list is endless. I won't go through the list. But these things are rather, unfortunately, universal. And they're not unique to our time period in history. And it's unfortunate. So that does influence my work, yes, in that way.
Yeah, and I asked that question because food and hunger in this country is tend to be depoliticized in certain ways. You know, we don't go to the ballot box thinking about food necessarily, but yet it is still an integral part of our everyday lives, obviously, because we all have to eat. And more and more so as like income inequality is growing, we're seeing these very divergent foodways where those who can't afford good food and those who are, you know, channeled into an emergency food network, for example. And what was exciting for me as part of this exhibit is the opportunity to repoliticize the discourse around food, and that food insecurity is something that's produced, right? It's not just a natural phenomenon. And I look forward to seeing it travel. And, you know, we're thinking of setting up the exhibit at mobile food pantry events, for example, and having folks engage and engage with your art. And even though you may not have created it with a political intent, by default of it being integrated in a food justice exhibit, which is by default meant to repoliticize food. And I just want to bring attention to that. The last panel on the constitutional amendment for the right to food in West Virginia, which is, very kind of political statement that all of the art ends up leading toward. And so, yeah, to me, it's a very interesting how art can be leveraged to shift discourse and crack open new ideas that someone reading text or whatnot might not encounter. Another thing, Peyton, when in your presentation, that last slide, I was really struck by the corporate capture of the dating scene. It's like all of our first dates are actually like, end up feeding this like agro-industrial conglomerate that it has also captured other parts of our food system and in certain ways tends to benefit from food insecurity and hunger. So, I mean, these conversations I think are interesting to put out there. The other, well, I think I'm going to just move to questions in the chat because there's a few coming through. Let me reopen that. Judith says she would love to hear about the intersection of food justice movement and the particular roles and experiences of women in intersection with the concept of gender. I don't know if either of you want to try to respond to that particular prompt.
I'm going to need to think about it.
Well, I'd have to say that feeding most usually falls upon women more in family structure. As much as I have a son-in-law who loves to cook, but the day-to-day, making sure the kids have what they need to bring to school for lunch and, making sure you have food in the house when the kids come home from school and family life, most of that negotiation falls upon women. And then certainly we have a lot of single moms too. So feeding a family tends to be a woman's job as much as we like to change our gender expectations. So it's a responsibility that doesn't go away. One of my friends ended up having her grandsons with her every day because her daughter had to work and the schools were closed. So she said she's always going to the supermarket because there were 3 boys and they would just empty out her refrigerator. And she said just all the supermarket and keeping everybody fed, what a burden it had become in her life. So that's my only comment on that.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that with my research in emergency food networks. 95% of the labor force in that network are women. A lot of the meetings I was in was with women and interrogating, the care labor around meeting the needs of those most vulnerable in our community tends to fall on women. But when you then start to analyze the structures that they're operating in, they're very masculine and hierarchical and top down. Even the way that, say, the metrics for the USDA SNAP program, which is our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, are calculated, is a very masculine idea of, we can measure the body and we can measure hunger in a specific way, and we're going to give X amount of dollars for X amount of calories for, without taking into the embodied experience of every single person. That, you know, some have a dairy allergy, or you need to spend more on X foods, or, you know, a diabetic. It's just this very like, yeah, so there's some literature written on the gender dynamics of the food system more broadly as we look at the institutions that structure it. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Peyton and Leo, do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, not being a woman, it puts me in a little different position commenting on that. But I would say that, you know, from my experience, everything that's been said is true. And, you know, I mean, like, I don't know how, you know, my mother fed the 6 kids that she had. And we had lots of potatoes. And I think that that's caused, so she didn't have to shop every day. We were full. But I do, like you were talking about, the way the government set up the programs and the way they don't address the needs of people who really need help, or understand how people who need help feed people. I mean, I think if you know, and there's millions of them out there, if you took, you know, a poll of 1 million people, you know, like my mother who fed 6 kids on not a lot of money, and asked them how to do it, we would probably have a much more equitable program distributing food and assistance to families who need it than we get from a couple of economists who probably went to Ivy League schools. And like you said, talk to a doctor or two and measure caloric intake and caloric burn and figure out what's best for those people they know nothing about. I think I'll end it there.
Yeah, I just put in the chat another section of the exhibit that wrestles with some gender questions. I know there's a few more. I'm not trying to navigate the online exhibit and facilitate this discussion at the same time, but I do encourage you to, you know, the person to ask that question to engage with the exhibit, because it does wrestle with these questions of gender in the food system. So I'm excited that this exhibit is going to be traveling to the Beckley campus next year, which is in southern West Virginia, and then to Appalachian State. And yeah, I'm just wondering if this might also create more momentum for people to engage in art around food justice throughout our region. And what advice would you have for other artists that may be interested in food, artists that are just beginning in their careers, using this lens to produce art?
Something you might think about. There's been a lot of interest in what they call social practice art. I don't know how much you're aware of that. It's been on my radar screen for a couple of years, and some of my art projects move into social practice where you're engaging the community, and rather than kind of top down, like the artist makes the art, you know, and people come and look at it. It's a different kind of structure where the community creates the art and maybe the artist sets up the structure. So that might be a direction as you expand this and move it around to create some kind of more social practice, community engagement kinds of activities, so that you bring more people into the process. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. It also sounds like quite the commitment on the artist's part.
Yes. Well, get a grant.
Yeah.
To do something, or, you know, or students or something. Get, you know, that's.
No, yeah, I mean, that does get me thinking.
Your institution aspects.
There's a budding around the right to food movement in the state. We now have some community organizers in different parts of the state. It would be interesting to see if they might want to engage in this practice, social practice art.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I would also comment that, I mean, as we all know, there's, as many artists as there are out there, there are ways of, functioning in their practice. And, the social practice artists are very committed to what they do. And it's really about having that engagement and stuff. And that, I think if you can find artists who are practicing in that way, that's a really good way, as Aileen said, to make this happen. I think the other thing is, I mean, and I can only talk from my personal perspective. I've always, like I said, I don't make work intentionally to be political, because that's not my nature. But I've always felt also that sometimes, like historically, when you study art history and stuff, sometimes when you look at work from the past, it was made for a specific moment to make a specific statement at that moment. When the time passes, the significance of the art wanes. There's lots of artists who are very comfortable working that way, and they understand that, and that's okay. And then there's other artwork that has been made throughout history that have made political statements that have been more universal or timeless, and that message can be conveyed long after the artist is gone, possibly. And I think why that work works is because that work makes people think. And I think that this combination of, people being activists and interacting, and also some artwork that's just there that may make somebody think about something. I mean, and the thinking about it could be as simple as noticing that the person they see hanging around at a local gas station all the time, who's always there, who they just think is kind of a ne'er-do-well, might not be. I mean, there are other circumstances that have pushed them to that point, or why they're there, and and it just make people think. I think if you can set all the work that's in the exhibition, or when you do these things, I think it's very important people come out of exhibitions like this or events like this thinking about the issue more so than necessarily remembering per se the exact artworks or who the artists are, to make change. Yeah.
Thanks, Leo. Peyton, as the only representative of a Native Appalachian artist, what were your thoughts on this exhibit traveling through the state and the region?
I think it's awesome. I'm really, really excited that it's going to reach more people and spread more awareness. And I was also just going to follow up with what we've been talking about. I know, it's really important to spread that message and get that out to people. So even if someone isn't in a position to make change, just bringing these issues to light and forcing people to see these sort of injustices and inequalities that we have among all kinds of things, in Appalachia. I don't know. I think it's going to be a really eye-opening experience for everyone who sees it, not just in terms of food justice, but the other issues that we've talked about as well.
Thank you. I'm really bummed that Gerardo Valera, who contributed to some of the original art in the Food Justice Lab, wasn't able to be here today, because his art has really been used and leveraged for storytelling, and he was a student here at WVU, and I think figuring out ways, not just with the Food Justice Lab, but any other kinds of pathways to engage students in the activist research that's happening more and more so on WVU's campus would be cool. So I'd love to follow up with you, Peyton, and figure out how we do that well going forward. There is another question from Cameron. Aileen, you were talking about the riots at the Capitol being the inspiration for your next art pieces. Someone who lives in a town next to me is currently in jail for being involved. You want to respond to that?
Well, I guess there are people all over the country. People are going to jail for this, whether or not it really happened or was legitimate political discourse. So it's all over the place. Yeah. kind of, I find it scary. Somebody looked at, I had an open studio event with that work, and somebody was looking at it and just said, this work is really scary. Does it keep you up at night? And I said, well, you know, this is what I do about things that I find scary, is make art about it. So we're living in kind of a scary time.
Yeah, there are a lot of changes all around us for sure. And I think, yeah, how we engage and relate to food can also be a way to like bring folks together again, right? In a way that is not so politicized. We all have to eat. It's a very common denominator that there is no difference. We all need to nourish ourselves. Can we start there? And can we start talking about, you know, the processes that we're all engaged in to nourish ourselves as also a place to begin more political unity, you know, and healing and reconnection to our environment, which is also in crisis. And food and the environment is like, that's how we meet it every day, is putting food in our bodies because it comes from the environment, right? So I think despite these trying times for our country and our world, the hope for me is that food might also be the vehicle through which we can find a common discourse, common meaning, etc. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to pop either in the chat, or you're also free to unmute yourselves, turn on your video and ask them in person if you prefer to do that. In virtual person.
Question from Tom. I'll repost it.
Thank you. Tom asks, I'm curious how you handle how people, quote, interpret your art, or more likely misinterpret. For example, celebrating a donut. Does that happen?
So I guess because this is the first time I've displayed this series with a more like social political narrative with it. I've never really had any sort of misunderstandings like that before, because my work has always taken a really literal approach. I just have been like a still life realistic painter. So I guess no, that hasn't happened to me yet, but I'm sure it will at some point.
Others want to respond to that? How you put a piece out in the world and then it's free for people to interpret, and you kind of lose control of it. What are your thoughts on that? Oh, you just muted yourself.
Muted. I've had people, because I like to make work that doesn't always give an easy answer, because I don't like it to be so obvious. I've had work that was totally misinterpreted, which is very difficult. I did a series about anti-Semitism a while ago, and it was shown at a community college, a Passaic County Community College in New Jersey, and I used anti-Semitic statements. And of course, my viewpoint was to be critical and let's look at these awful things that are being said. And they had to put up a sign saying that the school was not endorsing these statements. So I felt like people were like looking at it and just very quickly not taking the time to think about what was actually happening with the work. So you know, you never know how people are going to interpret things.
My turn, I guess. Yeah, so it's follow up to that. I would say that as a visual artist, I mean, you're always at risk of putting something out there that will be misinterpreted. When I work with my students, I always kind of tell them that that's something they have to be concerned about, or not necessarily concerned, but aware of. And I tell them, if you're making work that, you know, you want to convey an exact message, you might be better off being a writer, so you can write it down and be real clear about what you want people to see and know and what you're saying. So I do think it's a risk. Aileen's experience points that out, and I just think it just comes with what we do, and you have to be aware of it and conscious of it, and not necessarily censor yourself because of it may being misinterpreted, but you have to understand that it may be, and then understand how to react to that.
Even in writing, as a writer, there's plenty of that. It's just hard to convey meaning. And but I think the special thing about art is that it does also open opportunities to discuss meaning over time. And you know, you had talked about your time horizon and how you reflect on your art that you made previously now, and even the artist's perception of his or her own art might change in its interpretation. I'm not sure. It's kind of my question, because I'm not an artist. Like, how do you reflect on even art that you produced 30 years ago? Are you reinterpreting it in new ways?
Sometimes I look at work I made 30 years ago, and I don't know if it's so much reinterpreting it or just, like you said, maybe not totally sure what you were trying to say then, or it has a different meaning now, but maybe just being glad that it's not out there anymore, you know, it's keeping it from the public, you know, something like that.
Yeah, well, we're hopeful that this particular exhibit will, you know, continue to be out there for a while. And just want to thank everyone, for all the artists who participated, who weren't able to be here today. And for those who did take the time, Leo and Peyton and Aileen, to share your work with us, share your expertise with us. And I'll pass it back over to Sally for any concluding notes.
I'll just reiterate the same thing. Thank you all for being here. If you're in Morgantown, I encourage you to come see this show. There's work by several artists, and it's and then the bigger exhibit, of course, is around the main floor of the downtown library. And we have a few more programs this spring, virtual programs, and potentially hybrid. I'll put that link in the chat. And please fill out a survey. Beth put that in the chat already. And thank you all again for being here, and have a lovely afternoon.